Okay, good afternoon. I'm Gennaro Avallone from Università of Salerno. We have our second meeting in this series of seminars for Political Ecology of Migration, Immobility, Green Colonialism, and Socio-ecological transformations. In this afternoon, in this second meeting, after the meeting with Jason W. Moore, I'm very happy to listen and to speak with Hamza Hamouchene. Hamza is an activist and researcher. He also works with Transnational Institute.
I think people need to mute themselves. Okay.
Some months ago, he published coordinating a book titled "Dismantling Green Colonialism" with Katie Sandwell. Dismantling Green Colonialism is a book on energy and climate justice in the Arab region. And now, for the main reasons of this series of seminar, I asked Hamza to speak about confronting green colonialism, energy and climate justice in the Arab region, but I asked also to link this regional analysis with the effects of green colonialism on local population and especially on displacement and migration, because this is the focus of this series of seminars, but also because we know that what we in Europe call ecology transition in other parts of the world, also near the Europe, in North Africa, in the Arab region, has different meanings, but not for all population, because in Hamza Hamouchene book we can read that for ruling classes in North Africa and Arab region, ecological transition can be an opportunity, but the problem is for local population and also for the problem is linked to forced displacement and forced migration, and in more comprehensive terms for the migration management. Okay, so we know that there is a link between these policies, these green policies, and migration management. The problem for us in Europe is to better understand what is this relationship. And Hamza is one of the activists and researchers that better can help us to understand this relationship. So, Hamza, this is my introduction to this seminar. And now you have 45-15 minutes for your presentation, and then we have not a questions and answer section, but a debate session. Okay. Thanks. Grazie.
Well, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I think it's good afternoon in your part of the world. Actually, I'm currently in the US doing a book tour. For that book I'm trying to present today, Dismantling Green Colonialism, Energy and Climate Justice. First of all, I would like to thank Gennaro for inviting me to this seminar series to share some reflections with you. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation I'm gonna share. Just please bear with me. Let me find it. Where is it? Okay, just 1 second. I'm not used to
Teams.
Teams. Okay. All right. Let's do it. Here. Do you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So my presentation today will revolve around the main arguments of the book that I co-edited with my colleague, Katie Sandwell, the title of which is Dismantling Green Colonialism, Energy and Climate Justice in the Arab Region. But before I get into the main arguments and tell you and give you some information and analysis and multiple stories from the Arab region, I would like to start by recognizing the reality of genocide taking place in Palestine and specifically in Gaza, because we cannot talk about colonialism, green or otherwise, about dismantling it, about decolonization, or about environmental and climate justice in the Arab region and beyond, and turn a blind eye to the genocide that is taking place in Palestine today, perpetrated by a deeply racist apartheid and settler colonial state of Israel, with the active support of imperialist powers from the United States, the European Union, to the UK, to France, to Germany, and to other powers in the global north. I think we need to stand together and call for an immediate ceasefire, for the halt and the end of this horrific genocide. But in the long term, I think, and more importantly, is that we need to stand in solidarity, in active solidarity with the Palestinians in their resistance and in their liberation struggle. Because decolonization is not a metaphor. Decolonization is rooted in material struggles for liberation, in the resistance of people and communities against all forms of oppression. It has become fashionable in the academic circles nowadays to talk about decolonizing everything, except when it comes to resistance and proper material decolonizations where people are fighting their oppressors and colonizers. So I think that's important to say at the outset. Usually I start by asking the question, why do we talk about the energy transition? Why do we talk about the move towards renewable energy? Because we are facing an escalating ecological crisis and worsening climate crisis at the global scale, with much more or much worse impacts taking place in the global south. And this ecological crisis finds its manifestations clearly in the Arab region, from environmental destruction, pollution, the exhaustion of land and natural resources, water poverty, to the worsening impacts of the climate crisis, from desertifications, repeated droughts, recurrent heat waves, wildfires, deadly floodings. I'm sure you know about the floodings that took place in Libya last September, where more than 11,000 people died. And as well as other forms of or other impacts, like the rise of sea levels that threaten even the existence of Mediterranean islands like Jerba and Qarqna in Tunisia. And this ecological and climate crisis does not happen in a vacuum. It intersects with other forms of crisis. It intersects with the food crisis, with the energy crisis, the socio-economic crisis, the political crisis inside those countries. For me, to appropriately understand and situate that ecological crisis, we have to grapple with the capitalist extractivist model of development that has been imposed on the region since colonial times by imperialism. So what do I mean by extractivism? Extractivism refers to those processes of appropriation and accumulation that have been unleashed all over the planet since the 15th century through the European invasion of the Americas. And as you can imagine, that process has been shaped by exploitation, plunder, blood, slavery, and theft of natural resources. And a similar process took place in the Arab region in the 19th century through the colonial powers. And strictly speaking, extractivism refers to those activities which remove large quantities of natural resources that are not processed or processed to a limited degree, especially for export to the global markets. And in that respect, limited to fossil fuels, minerals, and metals, but it can be present agribusiness, in intensive agriculture, forestry, fishing, and even tourism with its intensive water use. Throughout my field visits to various sites of extractivism, from fossil fuels to phosphate mining to agribusiness, I've seen what the dependency school describes as the development of underdevelopment. And here you can read the work of Samir Amin and Walter Rodney, but also what some people called accumulation by dispossession. So on one hand, you see wealth of natural resources, but in the other hand, you see underdevelopment, environmental destruction, unemployment. And this is the paradox of extractivism, where it creates sacrifice zones with sacrificial people, where their bodies, their health, their air, their water, and their natural resources are sacrificed in order to maintain the accumulation of wealth and profits. And when I say sacrifice zone, I really mean it. Ain Saleh, in my home country, Algeria, is a very rich gas town. I think I would say it's one of the richest gas towns on the African continent. But when you look at its infrastructure, it's very poor. The only hospital that they've got, they call the Hospital of Death. And the examples are numerous from the region, and I documented that in various publications, including extractivism and resistance in the Maghreb. And you can look at the various ones from Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. And obviously, there is an entanglement between extractivism and imperialist wars, and we cannot separate extractivism from the global war machinations and the militarist governance of the world. Iraq and Libya warrant more attention, as they are the victims of the violence caused by fossil fuels and the Western fighter jets and bombs that go searching for their abundance. And I wanted to share this slide with you. I'm not going to go a lot into the details, just to point to some of the literature that I think should place extractivism within. Extractivism operates under capitalism, under dynamics of ecological unequal exchange or ecological imperialism. And this is based on the environmental disparities that we see across different social groups, urban versus rural areas, as well as between nations. So basically the benefits from the exploitation of the environment and the burdens from the environmental degradation are distributed with marked inequalities across these lines I just mentioned. And an ecological exchange, like a brief definition, is basically the asymmetrical transfer of ecosystem goods and services from one region of the world to another. And that, of course, this happens at the service of capital accumulation at the global level. So that's why people talk about ecological imperialism. And I really urge you to look into some of that literature out there. Before I'll come back a bit later to the region and give you many examples of green colonialism, green grabbing, and so forth. I wanted to share some numbers and statistics that would illuminate our discussion a little bit later. Because there is a mainstream discourse promoted right now by the decision makers, by policy makers all over the world, from north to south, and also by especially the Western mainstream media, saying that in face of the climate crisis, we are all in this together. So everyone needs to do their bit. So I think when we start looking at the responsibility of emitting CO2, and this figure basically looks at the cumulative historical CO2 emissions since the 18th century, exactly 1751 to 2017. And as you can see, the responsibility lies clearly in a few countries. The USA, with the European Union, you add to it Canada, and you add to it Australia, it's around 50% of CO2 emissions for a population that is only around 10% of the global. So clearly the responsibility lies in the industrialized West. And of course, there are responsibilities from other countries, but the main responsibility comes from fossil capitalist countries that developed that form of capitalism since the 18th century. And if we add the colonial rule and the responsibility, you'll see that it goes a little bit more. But it remains that the US, the European Union, plus UK are the biggest CO2 emissions in terms of the cumulative historical emissions. And then come China and Russia, Brazil, and other countries. And if we look at the companies, the corporate sector, you'll see that the 20 top companies that are responsible for a third of carbon emissions, they are fossil fuel companies. And they are not just in the global north. A lot of them also happen to be in the global south, the Iranian and even Sonatrach, the Algerian one, I can see it down the line. The corporate sector has a big responsibility in emitting CO2 emissions. And then, I don't know if you've seen that new report that was released a few months ago, looking at climate inequality as the gap, and specifically looking at the individuals. And one shocking statistic is that the richest 1% of this planet, which is around 77 million people, the millionaires and the billionaires of this planet, emit much more than the poorest two-thirds, basically more than 5 billion people. So clearly the responsibility, we're not all in this together. Of course, every one of us need to do their bit, but some of us need to do more. Especially the richest amongst us, especially the most industrialized countries, and especially the corporate sector. I just wanted to put that in your mind, so it's going to shape our discussion a little bit later. So in the midst of this ecological and climate crisis, it is clear that a transition to a more sustainable system has become inevitable, even for the capitalists. But justice in that process is not guaranteed. And I'm going to give you a few stories about that question of justice that is being trampled and undermined in the process of moving to renewable energies. So who shapes the discourse and response towards the climate crisis? Every year, the political leaders with their advisors and media representatives, as well as the lobbyists from the corporate sector, meet in what is called the Conference of the Parties, the climate talks. And I think it's much more appropriate to call it the Conference of Polluters. 30 years of talk, and the CO2 emissions kept rising, and the climate crisis getting much worse and exacerbating. So clearly those climate talks have failed, are bankrupt, especially when we see the fossil lobbyists and their number increasing year after year, from Glasgow to Egypt to Emirates last year. The Arab region hosted 5 COPs since their inceptions in the 90s. The most recent one, the one in Egypt, in the beautiful democracy of Assisi, and COP28, where the COP president was the head of the Abu Dhabi Petroleum Company. It's if like you're given the responsibility to put off the fire to the arsonists. That's exactly what they're doing. This year, COP29 is not going to be different because it's going to take place in Azerbaijan, another fossil fuel dictatorship. So you are seeing where I'm going with this. So those spaces are becoming less democratic, more authoritarian, and just bankrupt and failing. And more fundamentally, the main problem for me is the corporate hijacking of these spaces, because the fossil fuel industry, as well as the corporate sector in general, are dominating those spaces and are pushing for profit-making false solutions. The capitalists, in times of crisis, they would like to benefit. It's a kind of a shock doctrine, always trying to create new frontiers of accumulation by pushing these market-based mechanisms of trade carbon, carbon offsets, net zero, nature-based solutions, and so forth. But in reality, they are the same paradigm. They represent the same paradigm of accumulation by dispossession, but this time with a green color or a green cloak. The main actors shaping the narrative and discourse of responding to the environmental and climate crisis in the Arab region are international neoliberal institutions like the World Bank, the EU agencies, international development agencies, from the German Corporation to USA to the French Corporation. So all these actors are busy organizing workshops, conferences, publishing reports in various languages, including in Arabic. But even though they are active, their analysis is biased, because they are aligned with the interests of the rich and powerful. Their analysis does not take into account questions of class, race, gender, power, colonial history, and the solutions that they propose, they do not go to the root causes of the ecological, climate, food, and energy crisis. They are top-down. They rely on the advice of or the scholarship of the expert, excluding local workers and local communities and activists in shaping, those solutions. They are market-based, and they push for the realization of more profits for the private sector through privatization of everything. Privatization of land, privatization of water, of resources, of food, of energy, and even the atmosphere, because they are doing all that carbon trading and carbon offsets to make money. So in that sense, these institutions are the enemy of climate justice and the enemy of people's sovereignty and their right for self-determinations in those regions. Let's come back a little bit to the region and focus a little bit now on the renewable energy sector. So there is this kind of colonial environmental narrative that has been developed since the 19th century, especially under French and British colonial rule in the Arab region. That environment, that representation, or let's say misrepresentation and misnarration of the environment and people in the Arab region was a tool of domination at the level of discourse to pursue the interests and the priorities of colonial and imperial powers. So they can further their dispossession, their land grabbing, their exploitation, and domination of those regions. And Diana Davis used the framework of Orientalism by Edward Said and extended that framework to the environmental arena when she looked at the Anglo-European imaginaries of looking or representing the environment as alien, fantastical, exotic, degraded to some extent, defective, and needing the intervention of the white man or the white civilization to repair it, to restore it, to normalize it. And this is environmental Orientalism. One iteration of that environmental Orientalism today is the representation of the Sahara and the desert as a vast, empty land, sparsely populated, representing a kind of an El Dorado for Europe to get its cheap green energy while it continues its energy-intensive consumption and production pattern. And as you can imagine, this narrative is deceptive. It's full of lies. First of all, those lands are not empty. They are being used by local populations. And that narrative ignores questions also of property, of sovereignty, and obfuscates the ongoing neo-colonial relations of domination and hegemony that facilitate the grabbing of land and resources and the exclusion of local communities and workers from deciding important decisions around their land and resources and how they should be using. And many examples from the region show how those extractivist practices that I described a little bit earlier are being reproduced, and how colonial and neo-colonial agendas are being pursued in the form of green colonialism, neo-colonialism, or green grabbing. So what is green colonialism? Green colonialism, for me, is basically the extension of the colonial relations of domination, plunder, dispossession, exploitation, as well as the dehumanization of the other to the renewable era. So we basically what we are seeing is we are seeing the externalization of environmental social costs from a set of countries in the world, which happen to be the cores, the centers of empire, the richest countries, to the peripheries of this system, to the poorest countries, the less advanced countries. So the environmental and energy priorities of those core countries, imperial countries, take precedence over the environmental and energy priorities of other countries and communities in the global south. And that is basically green colonialism. But I think we need to say something about the global energy transition. I think for me, transition, I always put it under quotation mark because I don't believe that there is really a transition taking place. It's more of an expansion. But even if we, let's say, okay, it is a transition, first of all, it is happening unevenly, mostly in countries of the global north and in some pockets, countries in the global south. But the thing that a lot of people do not know, this transition is going to be predicated on the extraction and exploitation of basic and rare metals and minerals like cobalt, lithium, copper, nickel, graphite, and other rare earth minerals. The question that we need to ask here, where would these resources come from? They would come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of the richest countries in cobalt, from Indonesia, one of the richest countries in nickel, from the lithium triangle in Latin America, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, from China, from Zambia, from Tanzania, where the extractivism would intensify and where the exploitation of workers would get worse. So basically, we are seeing the same system, the capitalist imperialist system, but with a different source of energy, from fossil fuels to green. So fossil capitalism and green capitalism marrying each other and going ahead. Like they're not, for now, green capitalism is not replacing fossil capitalism. I would say they are moving together in the same line with intersecting and interlocking interests, because a lot of companies are involved in both sides, like Total Energies, Eni, and others. As for green grabbing, it refers to those dynamics of the appropriation of land and resources for supposedly green agenda, from the confiscation of indigenous land to safeguard it, to protect it through conservation projects, to taking or the grabbing of land from agro-pastoralist communities to build big solar plants and wind farms without their proper approval and consent. Let me now get into a few examples of green grabbing, green colonialism, and so forth. So there is this Dubai firm, Emirati firm, called Blue Carbon. This blue carbon company sells carbon offsets, which is basically a euphemism for pollution permits. So if a company like Eni, for example, wants to continue its fossil fuel operation and polluting activities, what it does, it goes to one of these companies, and it's not just the Emiratis who are doing this, it's everybody in the north and south, everybody, like the capitalists are seeing a lot of interest in those things, in those fields. So it pays this company, it buys some pollution permits, while this company claims it's gonna conserve the forest there, it's gonna plant trees and so forth. First of all, those carbon offset, carbon trading schemes have been proven to be fraudulent and scam. Most of them, they do not do what they say they're doing. So I think we need to put that on the top of our head. Second, look at the huge surfaces of land that these companies are acquiring. Millions of hectares. 10% of Liberia, 20% of Zimbabwe. It's just incredible. And they're going to tell you those lands are empty, there are nobody there. No, it's not true. Indigenous and local communities use these lands, and they have been using them for centuries, and we know that. Forests are never empty. People use them. But then, I think the most important argument here comes back to the responsibility in tackling the climate crisis, in mitigating the climate crisis, in reducing emissions. The whole African continent is only responsible for 4%. But what we are seeing a shifting of the responsibility to mitigate the climate crisis, to reduce CO2 emissions from the richest countries, either in the global north or in the semi-peripheries, like the Gulf countries, one of the most polluting and CO2 emitting countries, to the least responsible and the more vulnerable in terms of that. And actually, some people will say, this is a win-win-win situation. It's not, because 70% of the profits made through these projects go to these companies, to the private sector. So the local governments are not really earning a lot of hard currency. Actually, they are dispossessing their own people, and they are agreeing to the terms of the game, which is the game of green capitalism. The Warzat solar plant in the southeast of Morocco. I've done a lot of work around this, and I've written extensively around it, and actually there are others who have done additional work. It has been launched in 2016, just before the climate talks, COP22, that was taking place in Marrakesh at the time. In 2016, it was being described as the biggest solar plant in the world, praising, the leadership of the Moroccan kingdom, saying, yeah, they are doing their bit, they are moving on the path towards sustainability and so forth. But just a little scratch under the surface by looking at the details of the project will reveal a bleak picture. First of all, it is a land grab. The big solar plant was built on 3,000 hectares of collective lands, the pastoralist lands, without a proper consultation process, without basically their approval and consent. That's one thing. Second thing, this is not a publicly owned or community-owned project. It is a privately owned project. They say it's a public-private partnership. It sounds very good, but in reality, it's a euphemism for the privatization of profit and the socialization of losses. And in fact, this project, because it is used in an expensive technology called the concentrated solar power, has been losing money every year, 80 million euros every year. But those losses are not on the private companies that are conducting this project. The private companies are a consortium between Aqua Power, a Saudi company, and other Spanish companies. But it is on Moroccan citizens in a heavily indebted country. Do you think that really makes sense? Do you think that this is just? And when you look at the amount of debt that this project contracted, $9 billion with Moroccan guarantees, what that means, if the project fails or loses, the profits of the private sectors are guaranteed, and the losses would be put on the government and the Moroccan citizens. Some people call these de-risking strategies. So nowadays, capital and the corporate sector do not risk investing. What they say, if you want me to invest and come to invest, you need to de-risk. Basically, we're not going to share the risks. You share the risk, and you guarantee. The risk is on you, on the governments, on the public, on the people where those projects are being conducted, but the profits need to be guaranteed. But even so, when we look at the environmental credentials of this project, we realize that the solar plants need an extensive amounts of water to cool down the system and also to clean the panels. And that water was being taken from the nearby dam. I visited the area 3 or 4 times. That nearby dam has dried. So the water was shifted from drinking and local agriculture towards this solar plant. I don't know if we can call really this sustainable. Especially in semi-arid region like Ouarzazate, where droughts are taking place every year. Same story in Midelt, in Morocco as well. It's to the north east of Ouarzazate. We are seeing a building of one of the biggest hybrid solar plants, combining 2 technologies, photovoltaic as well as concentrated solar power. And it's the same story, dispossession of local communities from their land. They cannot use it for grazing. They have not been employed, so they're not employed. They are not seeing the benefit. They even described it as an occupation. There were some arrests, there were some resistance and protests in there. They have been repressed, of course. And I think this is just another case of decarbonization by dispossession in reference to the concept of accumulation by dispossession. So we are seeing decarbonization efforts going towards renewable energy while dispossessing others. So if the 3 examples that I mentioned now can be described as green grabbing or green neocolonialism, what takes place in occupied land in the region, in Western Sahara, Golan Heights, and Palestine, can be simply described as green colonialism, because it's taking place on occupied land and in spite of local people's right for self-determination. And actually that's what the Moroccan kingdom is doing in occupied Western Sahara, building solar plants and wind farms and trying to export that green electricity to nearby countries, creating links and normalizing that kind of occupation. And yeah, many companies are involved, from European to Gulf companies, trying to take a piece of that cake. So if similar dynamics are taking place in Palestine with a much more brutal and deadly effects. Manal Shqayr, she wrote a brilliant chapter in the book. I really encourage you, I highly recommend it, where she looks at how Israel has been greenwashing colonialism, putting forward this, again, colonial orientalist environmental narrative, portraying Palestine pre-1948 as an empty, parched desert, which has become a blooming oasis after the establishment of the State of Israel. And by doing that, it covers up its war crimes against the Palestinian people by posing as this green, advanced country, as an environmental steward, sharing environmental technology, desalination water technology, and helping other countries move towards the renewable path. And this is very dangerous because she calls this phenomenon of normalizing with Israel in the environmental field, including in the Arab region, since the Abraham Accords with the United Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, we've seen eco-normalization. It's eco-normalization, and it needs to be resisted. And she documents Project Prosperity between Israel, Jordan, and Emirates, and also she shines some light on some Israeli companies that are involved in the fossil fuel industry, but as well as in the renewable energy sector, doing various projects in the region. And I think she advocates for the strengthening and the support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions of these companies and of Israel in order to isolate it, because it's benefiting from the exploitation of Palestinians and their resources that we need to stop. Another big dynamic in the book that we are describing, and I think there are around 5 or 6 chapters looking into the liberalization, privatization of renewable energy with an export orientation. And many authors looked at the role of international financial institutions, including the World Bank, in facilitating that process and that dynamic. Let me zoom a little bit to Tunisia and look at that dynamic and what is taking place. I just put that number there. Tunisia's share of CO2 emission is just 0.07%. It is a small country. It's not an industrialized country. It does not emit a lot, so its responsibility in causing the climate crisis or in emitting is very, very, very low. But at the same time, Tunisia faces dire impacts of the climate crisis. I'm sure you're aware that in the last 5 years, Tunisia have seen one of the most protracted droughts in its history. Last year, they were forced to ration water, to reduce using it in many sectors. So it's facing a huge water stress and poverty exacerbated by the climate crisis. And the agency, the process inside the UN called the UNFCCC that is responsible in tackling the climate crisis differentiate the strategies of addressing the climate crisis into 2. The mitigation, climate mitigation, reducing CO2 emissions, which is the responsibility of the richest, most advanced and industrialized countries, the most polluting. That's the global north in general, but you have also China, Russia, India, the emerging powers, because they emit a lot. But at the same time, they have the right to develop those emerging powers. And then you have climate adaptation. Climate adaptation is the priority of countries and communities in the global south, especially the poorest, the least advanced, and the least industrialized, where they are much more vulnerable to the climate crisis. But what we are seeing now in Tunisia is that its strategy is lopsided. It's putting more money, more efforts into climate mitigation, reducing CO2 emissions. You may say, okay, this is mismanagement, this is corruption, the political leadership in Tunisia does not have a clear vision. There is some truth in all these elements, but I think the main problems is the dictates that come from outside, from international financial institutions, from European powers, including the Italians, to push Tunisia to build big solar plants and wind farms, to export green electricity. Now there is talk about ELMED project to link in Tunisia with Italy, so green electricity can go from there. And at the same time, of course, stemming the flows of migration. So it's okay to get, the resources, to get the electricity, but people, no. I documented another project with an export orientation called Tunur in 2017, where it was saying clearly that we're going to build a big solar plant in the Tunisian desert and export all the electricity to Italy, to the European Union, to the UK. Tunur is run by a company called Noor. It is headquartered in London, actually. And I think it's a coalition of British, Italian, Maltese, and Tunisian entrepreneurs that they want, of course, to export everything. But when we know that Tunisian electricity, most of Tunisian electricity actually, the majority, extreme majority, comes from fossil fuels, comes from imported gas from Algeria. So isn't the priority to build those solar plants and wind farms and to green the grid, to provide cheap green electricity to Tunisians, to move Tunisia down the path of energy self-sufficiency rather than, push for these export-oriented thing? But, the priorities of capital are different. And it's not just Tunur. We have this X-Links project now on the table. It is a project proposed by a British investor with a partnership with Saudi Aqua Power, but it seems other companies are jumping on board. I've seen some investment from Total Energies, and I think other companies also are involved. The project aims to build big solar plants and wind farms in southern Morocco and then build undersea electrical cable that would take that green electricity to the UK. So, first of all, it is a big project, $22 billion. I'm wondering where would the money come from. And it's going to use a lot of land surface. And they're going to say, yeah, the land is empty. But then it's what annoys me is always the priority and the primacy of the export orientation. These projects are not built for the local populations or for their interests and their priorities. Morocco, even if it is more advanced than its neighbor countries in terms of producing renewable energies, 80% of its electricity is still produced from fossil fuels, from imported fossil fuels. Morocco does not have fossil fuels. So isn't the priority again to build these big solar plants and wind farms and to produce green electricity for the local populations and to provide them with cheap green energy? But what we are seeing, it's the same patterns of extractivism and grabbing that I described that we see in fossil and mining capital or mining capitalism. It's the usual colonial scheme under our eyes that is being unfolded with, again, the unrestricted flow of cheap natural resources, including green electricity this time, from the global south to the global north, while Fortress Europe continues building its fences and walls and killing people in the Mediterranean. And it's the same story with the green hydrogen. And Desertec right now jumped on the bandwagon. I call it hydrogen colonialism. The European countries, especially Germany, want to push the countries in the region, North Africa, mainly Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Mauritania, to produce green hydrogen for export. Let me tell you I give you just a little bit about green hydrogen. So green hydrogen, hydrogen in general, the promoters, they say that it's gonna replace gas. So we're gonna use it in cars, in planes, in shipping, in heating. First of all, I don't believe it is that miraculous solution. It would play a role of course, but not to that extent. I believe it's green electricity. Most of the hydrogen produced right now comes from gas. We call it gray hydrogen. It is being used in the fertilizer industry and in the petrochemical industry. That's its main usages right now. So if we want to green that process, we need to produce that hydrogen from water. So you need to desalinate water, and then you need to produce green electricity through new solar plants and wind farms. You use that green electricity to divide or electrolyze the water molecule, H2O, and then you separate. So H2 is hydrogen, and then you have the oxygen. That hydrogen produces the cleanest form. But as you can see, you need water. In semi-arid and arid countries and water-stressed countries, doesn't it make sense to use that desalinated water for drinking and local agriculture? And then you produce green electricity. As I said, I gave you the example. Isn't it more important for those countries to use that green electricity to achieve their energy self-sufficiency and move down the energy transition? But what we are seeing those foreign dictates coming from European powers, companies, with the complicity of the ruling classes, of course. So it's not just about blaming the other. Our ruling classes benefit from those things. Telling us we need to produce green hydrogen for export. Just imagine. And those projects would necessitate a lot of land. I looked at this Total, another fossil fuel company involved in those projects. I tell you, they are creating, new value chains. They want to dominate them. So it is another frontier of accumulation for them. Just look at how much land that this project needs. Excuse me, I need to. 180,000 hectares of land, and I needed to look to compare it with the surface of the London area where I live, and it's much bigger. So we have, as I said earlier, it's the externalization of environmental and social costs in terms of water, in terms of land, in terms of the possible pollutions of desalinations, and most of these projects are capital intensive. So in the medium and long term, they're not going to create sustainable jobs. And then there are questions also of technology transfer. Are these companies going to transfer technology and create industrializations and factories, real factories in those regions? I have my doubts, to be honest with you. Yeah, you look at the beautiful world of the hydrogen lobbies. All the beautiful fossil fuel companies are involved, so they see it as an opportunity to continue their operations. They know that it's not going to be green hydrogen. It's going to be gray and blue, where they use carbon capture and sequestration technology. So it's really dodgy. All of this hype around hydrogen, I don't believe in it. So I think I touched a little bit on this earlier. We are seeing an energy expansion, not really an energy transition. And it's not just coming from global south. Actually, the biggest expansion of fossil fuels happen in the global north, happen in the United States and Denmark and the UK, as well as, of course, countries in the global south like Guyana and the Gulf countries. But just you look at the amount of fossil fuel subsidies being pumped to them. They increased from $5 trillion in 2020 to $7 trillion in 2022. And still we are seeing most of the global primary energy, 80%, is still coming from fossil fuels. So we're not seeing a kind of a replacement yet. I think they are moving together. I'm going to say a little bit about Algeria before I'll end. I'll end on this so we can open to discussion. There has been an uprising in Algeria in 2014-2015, an anti-fracking uprising. At the time, France banned its companies, Total and others, from fracking on its own territories, but it was providing diplomatic support for these same companies to go and frack in Algeria. If that's not energy colonialism and environmental racism, I don't know what it is. And we are seeing same dynamics during the war in Ukraine, the dash and scramble for gas. The Europeans tell us, yeah, we need to wean off from Russian gas because Putin is the dictator and imperialist, and they go to the beautiful democracies of Algeria and Egypt and the settler colonial state of Israel and the repressive and authoritarian government of Qatar to get more gas. But I think at a fundamental level, what is problematic in all of this is that we are seeing more gas locking, more extractivism, more path dependencies, and a potential for substantial stranded assets in those countries. It's always the primacy of EU energy security. That's what matters first. That is the priority, and then you externalize the costs and you strike deals with other local ruling classes that would benefit as well. One big section of the book, it's not a big section, I think it's just 3 articles, looks at the challenges of to fossil capitalism and the challenges to the energy transition. And we say that clearly in our introduction. We need to resist the tendency that views the whole Arab region as an undifferentiated whole, because there is an inherent unevenness and deep inequalities in the Arab regions at the regional level, but also inside those countries. So if you look at the Gulf countries, I call them sub-imperialist forces. Saudi Arabia is much richer than Yemen. Emirates is much richer than Lebanon, significantly much richer than Lebanon and Tunisia. So they are completely in 2 different leagues. But not only that, they participate in the capture and siphoning off of surplus value at the regional level, reproducing those core periphery-like relations of domination, grabbing, extraction, and accumulation by dispossession. In fact, Gulf capital is present in key sectors, in many economic sectors in neighboring countries, from real estate to urban development to agribusiness to telecommunication, finance, banking, logistics, infrastructure, and even in renewable energies now with some rising Gulf companies like Aqua Power and Masdar. And the region, especially the Gulf countries, remains at the core of contemporary fossil capitalism, and they are doing everything to maintain their position in the global energy regime. The Saudi minister in 2021 said it clearly: we are still going to be the last man standing, and every molecule of hydrocarbon will come out. And just if we look at the profits, the record-breaking profits of Aramco in 2022, that exceeded the combined results of Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, and Chevron, will realize the importance of that region and how we must take it seriously, because they're gonna be indisputable protagonists of any climate debates or any future attempts to phase out from fossil fuels. And Adam Hania in the book sounds the alarm to the climate justice movement, saying you need to take the Middle East seriously, because it's gonna represent a big challenge to that energy transition, especially with the new East-East hydrocarbon axis, stronger ties between Gulf countries and China in the petrochemical industry and other industries. So I think this is going to represent a big challenge to our conversation. I finish here. Maybe we can talk about the alternatives a little bit later, but I just wanted to finish by this slide. I think for me it's the most important one, is when we talk about these projects, either in the renewable energy sector or in agriculture or in any economic sector, we always need to ask key political economy questions. Who owns what? who does what, who gets what, who wins and who loses, and whose interests are being served. The point by asking these questions is not to publish books and write academic articles, but first of all is to analyze how capitalist and imperialist dynamics work so we can build a better world. Second, we need to identify strategic targets and key nodal points for resisting, challenging, and intervening against capital, because we're not going to overthrow capitalism overnight, so we need to prepare for that. And third, we need to uncover the deception of capital trying to reproduce itself under the guise of the green economy, greenwashing and so forth. And more importantly, we need to build the needed and necessary alliances of working people to bring about transformational change and one day the end of the capitalist and imperialist system. Thanks for listening to me. I'll stop here.
Okay. And many thanks, Hamza. Okay. Now one image in my head is that Europe, our green transition is surrounding the Arab and North Africa areas for our green transition. Surrounding is a military image, because we have some economic and political power that decide with a part of ruling classes in North Africa and in the Arab region, the present and future of a part of local population in so-called peripheral areas. And this is the same frame. This is the same policy and politics of the historical colonialism. It's the same. So from the theoretical point of view, the category of neo-colonialism works very well. But we know that colonialism has had historically, in historical terms, very dangerous effects, consequences on the local population. And it is but in our rhetoric, in our public discourse, these relationships are absent when we speak in Europe, when we speak about ecological transition. This is a very clean process. Coherent with a win-win-win rhetoric, we don't have problems with this, and we don't have inequalities. We don't have power relations in this transition, in this array of policies, and so it's very useful, your presentation and the book and the work from activists and researchers as your work. I have two questions, and then I stop for the other people. If you know about sources about the relationship between people displacement, and this kind of projects. If you have data about people displacement. This is the first. Or if we don't have displacement, if we have data about socio-economic conditions of people that live in these areas, in the areas interested by these green projects. And then I have a second question. In the introduction written by with Kate Sandwell, you wrote about climate security. You wrote about climate security lens used by governments to manage the climate change. And so the question is if you can speak more about this, how this security is organized, and what is the relationship between climate security lens and migration management policies implemented by states in North Africa and in the agreements with European countries, especially with Italian country. Grazie.
Thank you. Shall we take more questions, Gennaro, or?
As you want.
Yeah, let's take more questions, and then I'll try maybe 2 or 3, and then.
Okay. 2 speakers is sufficient to open the microphone. You are able to open microphone and speak. Okay, Arianna.
Hi, Hamza. Happy to see you again in this context of this PhD, and thank you for this amazing presentation. So I would like to ask you 2 questions, or maybe just one general question. The first one is, what do you think about the loss and damage system established during the COP27, which was supported and also considered as a victory by part of the Global South movements, but also criticized by another side. And more generally, I'd like to hear your critique. Sorry, I'd like to hear your critique of this about this new political discourse that claims to be pursuing a new kind of equal, fair, peer-to-peer cooperation with the country of the Global South by implementing the same kind of extractive projects. And I'm thinking, for instance, about the Mattei Plan promoted by Giorgia Meloni, which claims to pursue a just transition, trying to give a different meaning to this critical expression. And I think for those who are not part of this field, of this sector, this kind of political speeches can lead to confusion. And I often heard around me that the Mattei Plan is a new revolution, a new kind of energy cooperation. So my question is maybe also how to fight, from your perspective, this narrative. Thank you.
Any more questions, or I should go with these first, and then while the other people gather their thoughts? I don't mind. If you have any burning questions, it's your time now, before I start answering. All right, okay. Let me answer, and then we can take another round of questions after this.
Yes.
So, Gennaro, about your questions about sources and data. I think this is context-based and country-based. It depends on which country. So, for example, in Morocco, it's really hard to get that data because it's very, very sensitive. Those projects are considered strategic, understandably, but also they are considered as the project of the king. And I think we need to emphasize that. So basically, sacred projects, you cannot touch them. Maybe you can voice some concern, but you cannot go and protest and stop and complain and, do all of that stuff. So why I'm saying this, because we've tried to look and to get information about the green hydrogen projects. There are a lot of green hydrogen projects being planned in southern Morocco, in the Gilmim area. We wanted to go there and visit and look at local communities and talk to them. We couldn't. It's very sensitive. People are very suspicious. It is securitized. And actually, most of those lands now, it's in a securitized area. You cannot approach. But it doesn't mean that we cannot get data. It means that we need to be very creative in how we can get that data, either through some documents being leaked to us or do more research at the level of the corporations involved. And I think this is some of the work that European researchers need to be doing. Look, who are the European companies involved? Mostly are European companies, unfortunately. And see if there are any published documents their side, ask for freedom of information requests, pressure them to release information about contracts, how much land is being used, and then I think some deductions can be made of the amount of the damage and displacement is being done. In Tunisia is much more easier. I think Ariana could say more about this. So you could go and do some investigative journalism in certain places. It's getting, of course, the situation is not as good as it was before, but still, if you compare it with Algeria, Egypt, or Morocco, I think it's much easier. Ariana, do you wanted to add something here?
No, I just confirmed that it is, becoming harder, but still easier than Algeria and Morocco for sure.
Yeah. So so there are things that you can do in Tunisia. It's just you need to find the information of those projects because not a lot of people know about them. Most people do not know that those projects are being built on certain lands. And people are not happy. But there are tensions and contradictions in there. So I think we need to document and see what is happening exactly. So this is a long answer to your question. Data, there is not a lot of data and statistics, but I think we need to work harder. That's what I feel. Second thing around the climate security.
Hamza, sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but this means that we have a problem with our democracy, no? And we have a problem with the possibility with the research. Okay.
Yeah.
And we have a problem with the relationship between research, European democracies, and dictatorship or authoritarian, no democratic states in the south linked to our states. Okay, so this is a problem for the research. It's not so. This is a problem also for European researchers.
Yeah.
And we have to focus on this problem, okay? Because now we have a problem with the possibility to debate and to discuss on Palestine, on Israel in Palestine and the occupation of Palestine. You know, in Germany we have a lot of problems and with a lot of limits for academic freedom. In Italy, we have some problems, not a lot, but we don't know. Okay, but I think that there is a wider problem with research freedom, also for Europeans. Respect to this area in in North Africa. Okay. Sorry for my interruption.
No. I think that's important to say.
This is a debate.
Because
Okay, sorry.
yeah, I think like the way I see it, I don't see a lot of that distinctions as if there are democracies in the north and then authoritarian military dictatorship. All of them are authoritarian regimes with different forms. So if you're telling me that Italy is a democracy under the fascist Meloni, I don't know what to say. And the same thing in France, the same thing in the UK, the same thing in the US here. So for me, that distinctions, there are different forms, of course. You're much freer to say things and organize and do stuff in Europe than under Assisi, for sure. But the entanglement, the support between those regimes in the north and those regimes in the south, who supports Assisi? It's those supposed Western liberal democracies, right? So I think we need to be careful in that thing.
Okay.
But that creates a lot of problems for us. I agree. In terms of access to the information, it's becoming really hard to access information, even in the north. And I see we are struggling to find information about those companies like Total, Iran, BP being involved in Mauritanian green hydrogen. Really hard to reach that information. And this is something that we need to put on the table. What can we do as researchers from North and South? How do we collaborate to reach that information?
For this reason, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So your question on climate security is very important because in the book we are pushing for a just transition framework and a justice lens, and we talk about sovereignty, not just national but popular sovereignty, as well as decolonization. We need to decolonize and fight colonial and neo-colonial dynamics. Because why? What we are seeing right now in the global responses towards the climate crisis is the securitization and the militarization of the response. So you see all kind of investments and projects to tackle the climate crisis, building walls and all that stuff and putting money here and there. But at the same time, we are seeing more restrictions on climate activists, more resistance to redistributing power and wealth at the global scale. And they are doing this through militarization. Like, imagine the US Army has a climate justice plan, which is basically militarize the response and anticipate millions of climate refugees. So how do we tackle that problem? That's how they look at it. An imaginary that is subordinated to questions of security, climate security and militarization would just reinforce the coercive arm of the state. And that's a problem. I think we need to think more about justice, about sovereignty, because more tanks and weapons or more walls and higher walls and militarized borders won't resolve the climate crisis. They will protect the elites. They will protect some of the minorities in the world at the expense of the majority that is being sacrificed. But in here, I think the most important point that I think is still under-analyzed and under-researched is the intersections between climate and militarism, climate and wars. The militaries are off the hook. The wars are overlooked. The US Army is the single institutional actor that emits more CO2 than any other institution in the world. It emits more than industrialized countries in Europe, Portugal and Denmark. So it emits a lot. And in the current context of the genocide in Gaza, there was an investigation published in The Guardian just in the first 2 months of the war. Most of the CO2 emissions coming from Israel, which is 99% of the emissions, are more than the emissions of 20 countries in the global south annually. Just imagine, in 2 months, Israel emitted more than 20 countries in the global south. And 2/3 of the emissions were coming from the shipping and the transport, aerial transport of weaponry from the US to Israel, which points to, of course, the active role that the US is playing in the genocide, but also to the under-analyzed or under-scrutinized role of the military-industrial complex in exacerbating the climate crisis, in heating the planet. And I think we need to do more about that. We need to challenge the military-industrial complex. Wars are going to be a big problem for us. And the region plays a central role in that. First of all, it is one big market of weaponry. I think it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, markets of weaponries, weapons that are being bought and exported to the region. That's one. But it's also a testing ground for new surveillance and population control technologies. We see that through the various wars, but also through the repression of populations in either in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in Algeria and Morocco. So these technologies are being used. And there is a big threat and danger that those new norms of climate security and militarism would be developed in the region and then exported to other regions of the world. So it is a big danger. Questions that Ariana asked, the loss and damage. That's a very important question, and I think, it's worth saying something here. So for me, yes, it is a historical step. The movements and countries in the global south pushed the UNFCCC during the climate talks to adopt this loss and damage fund. But I remain not very hopeful for various reasons. First of all, it's a toothless mechanism. It's not legally binding. So even if a lot of those countries, the US, the UK, Germany, all of them pledged money to put in that fund, it's not legally binding. They don't have to put that money. They can decide at the end to say, no, I'm not going to put money. That's the first thing. And based on the previous things that they promised, since 2009, the climate finance, they said we're going to, by 2020, that we're going to give $100 billion a year to countries in the global south to tackle climate crisis and to adapt. That, first of all, has not materialized. And if it materialized, it was mainly loans and additional debts. So it's not wealth transfer and technology transfer. It's additional debts. And it comes with interests. So I have those doubts about it. But then when I heard that it is being hosted in the World Bank, for me it's the red alarm. The World Bank is going to push for a certain thing, and that's what they've been pushing. Neoliberalism, open up the market, additional debts. They are not going to revolutionize the response of the climate crisis. Having said that, I think it's still worth continuing to fight inside and outside those climate spaces without having big illusions. I think we need to shift a little bit the narrative and talk about climate reparations and debts rather than just climate finance and loans. We need to shift that narrative and force those countries to pay because they have to pay. Otherwise, vulnerable countries in the global south, they cannot tackle the climate crisis on their own. The low-lying islands, the poorest countries in Africa, you have 600 million people in the African continent do not have electricity. So look at the level of challenges that we have. If the money does not materialize, or if it continues to materialize with conditioned debts and loans that comes with condition, I think it's a big problem. Regarding the Mattei plan and those projects, for me, I see them as just neo-colonial iterations. It's the same old talk. It is just being recycled. And of course, we use the language of sustainability, equity, justice, cooperation. That's what the Western powers and the imperialist powers have been talking about for a long time. Aid, they said they're going to eliminate poverty. They didn't eliminate it. They're going to help countries to develop. They haven't. They continued the same mechanism of plunder. domination, pushing for debts. If you're really serious in this project, first of all, cancel all the debts of those countries. Cancel them. That's one. And then build your industrial cooperation through technology transfer by creating industrial jobs in those local economies, real jobs, so people can benefit, so people can move up the value chain. If you don't do that, you're going to just trap them again. You throw money at them and you say, yeah, please do these projects because we need that energy. And then you say, and just by saying it's a win-win, it means it's a win-win. No, concretely they're not. And in here, we need to put them the question, Ariane, of the democratization in those in countries. It's really hard to build fronts and discussion around those questions without having, spaces to build and organize so you can resist projects like this. The ruling classes, they sit together always and they devise those plans and the populations do not benefit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ariana.
Paolo.
Paolo, we don't hear you.
Your analysis is interesting also because you speak about geopolitical relationships, but you don't substitute geopolitical analysis with class struggle analysis. Also, so for a lot of researchers also, and social research and political research also on the left, we have we live with this analytical problem. We speak about geopolitical relations as a football or a basketball game, no? Iran, Israel. So your presentation and your books are very useful because, sure, geopolitical relationships are fundamental because in the case of energy production, the agreements are between states and private companies, no, public-private partnership. But we have you present you speak in the book and also you say in the presentation that we have social struggle, we have class struggle, we have social movements that are active against if it's possible and as it is possible these green projects. So it's important to remind us that we have, sure, geopolitical relations, but these geopolitical relations are influenced by class relationship and by class struggle. And so we have to depend our analysis on the relationship between geopolitical relations, geopolitical frames, and class struggles and class relations. This is also a methodological issue, but it's also a political issue because we have to understand what social movements and subaltern classes make in Europe and also in the global South, and this is a fundamental methodological and a political and political question to study, but also to understand. Also, how we can collaborate, no, in different countries to better understand these relationships. Okay, many thanks. It's fundamental to avoid a geopolitical gaze. No, we need a class gaze. No, in this sense, neocolonialism and also imperialism can be useful categories to understand. Okay. Okay, Tonia needs to leave the meeting. Okay, we have other commentaries or questions for Hamza? Albo? Or other? Vanessa? No,
Vanessa,
no.
we don't hear you. Vanessa, we don't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot to.
Right.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question. I appreciated a lot the presentation about the geopolitical situation, etc. I don't study that things specifically, so it was very illuminating. I'm doing a PhD in Sardinia, and so the theme of colonization also pertains a bit in the situation of Sardinia, and in this island potentially would become self-sufficient with the renewables energy resources, because it has a lot of resources, the sun and the wind, but there is a problem of a lot of companies that came here to take the resources and exploit the resources of Sardinia to export the electricity that is produced here from the renewable resources. And this is a problem of a new colonization. Also, we can talk about it, even if it's on a different scale, in a different situation, but the dynamics are similar. And the citizens of Sardinia, they don't have economic or social benefits from these activities, because the resources are grabbed and then exported away to the other parts of Italy and in other places. And so the neoliberal pattern, it's replicated even here. And I, on a different scale, I study the renewable energy communities also. And these initiatives are talked to, are narrated like they can democratize and decentralize the energy sector and give political power to the citizens. But in reality, there are a lot of studies that are understanding more and more that the people that are members of these activities, these projects, instead they are not all the people that need to take part in these projects, the people in energy poverty situations. But they are male, they are adults, they have high education levels, and also they are not rich, but they are not poor. And so also this is a problem, because we talk about democratization, decentralization, and then the same people, always the not poor people, have the advantages and the benefits. So there are a very multi-level problems that we need to intersect to talk about all the transition that is happening or that, as you said, is not happening. In reality, there is only changing, things change, but the problems remains. So I only wanted to add this comment to the discussion. Thank you.
Ok. Paolo Amighetti. Prego, Paolo.
If
Online.
Paolo cannot speak, maybe he has problems to speak. Maybe he can write his question in the chat. Yeah. Yeah, maybe he has a problem with his microphone, I think. I don't know.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Hamza, for your presentation. I'm a researcher from the University of Torino, and right now I'm doing a research on conflict, environmental disaster, and climate and migration on Libya. So my question is about Libya, considering Libya, the conflict on Libya, how is it related to the natural resources in Libya, because Libya is, I think, the first country in North Africa and Africa for fuel and gas. So my question is, for you, how is related, why the conflict is still not ended in Libya, if it's related to the relation between the fuel and the gas, and even because all the agreements are made by a government not elected and supported by the UN, and so how this is related with the green transition. Thank you.
Gennaro, shall I answer those questions, or should we take another one? I don't know. Whatever you think. Shall I answer?
No. Go. Yes.
Okay. Just in terms of your comment around the class analysis and the geopolitical analysis, like the way I see it, the way I take it, I'm a Marxist myself, so class analysis is fundamental to my work. So it is the start point of any analysis that I do. But we need to understand that even the geopolitical analysis is a reflection of that class analysis at a global scale. So if class is a matter of contradictions between capital and labor, it finds its expression at the global scale between cores and peripheries. So that remains a class analysis. And it's not just countries. It's ruling classes in the cores with ruling classes in the south, sometimes together, sometimes in tensions and contradictions. But at the end of the day, it's about super exploitation of workers and small-scale farmers and producers in the south and in the north. So I think this is important to say. And in the book, we say clearly, just transition framework is about class, because there are attempts now to co-opt that concept, like other concepts before, like democracy, like climate justice. Corporations now are using climate justice, and global elites are using climate justice concepts. But it doesn't mean that we abandon those concepts and frameworks, but we need to recuperate them, to politicize them, give them, a radical meaning, an emancipatory meaning, but also go to the roots of those concepts. Just transition, for example, emerged from the convergence of three important movements in the United States in the 70s. The indigenous communities, the environmental justice movement, as well as the trade union movement, the labor movement. That they realized that they were fighting one system. At the time, it was the polluting chemical industry that was using divide and rule tactics, saying, if we're going to implement more environmental rules, it means I'm going to lay off workers. So these movements came together and said, no, we're not going to be divided. We are fighting one system that confiscates land from indigenous communities, that exploits workers, and that destroys environment. So I think that's it's radical. It's grassroots from the start, and we need to make it that way, or even reinsert it in struggles. It's about building alliances of workers, of peasantry, of various faction of the working class. It's not just the industrialized urban working classes. It's also the peasantries, the precarious workers, the social reproduction work, the care work that is being done mainly by women. And I think we need to put that in here. In terms of what Vanessa says, very interesting. Actually, I heard a lot about those dynamics in Sardinia, but also in Sicily. There are similarities that we can draw between the dynamics taking place there and in North Africa, in nearby North Africa, in terms of internal colonialism or neo-colonialism. And you don't have to call it that way. It's at the end of the day, it's accumulation by dispossession. Capitalism is a system of unpaid costs. That's how it works. It always externalizes or shifts the cost somewhere else. So it shifts the cost to the labor, to the working classes. It shifts the cost to women and care workers in terms of social unpaid care work and social reproduction. It shifts the cost from urban to rural areas. Most of the projects that we're talking about are taking place in rural areas on peasantries and pastoralist land. And also it shifts the cost from north to south. And that's why the category of imperialism and colonialism is very important here. Because super exploitation and the creation of sacrifice zones happen mainly, I'm not saying it does not happen in the north, but happen mainly in the global south, where democratic military dictatorship thrive, and where working classes are disciplined, and where there are no spaces to express. And I think it's very important. And in here, some of the solutions that we need to put on the table, because of course we're not going to overthrow capitalism tomorrow, but clearly there are things that we can do now. First of all, we need to keep organizing. We need to keep resisting destructive projects and the creation of sacrifice zones. We need to analyze and research and expose what capital is doing. And I think this is really part of your job and the things that you need to do, looking at what Italian capital and Italian companies are doing in terms of any in the region, in Egypt, in Algeria and Tunisia and other African countries. Eni is involved in not just in fossil fuels, but now it's embracing the clean technologies and green hydrogen. But at a fundamental level, we need to see energy as a common good, not as a privatized commodity. So we need to push for deprivatization. We need to push for strong public services in the north and the south. Also, we have another democratize. For me, it's very important. And it's not just democratize in the global south, democratize everywhere, because it's about power. It's about who shapes decisions, who decides how resources are being consumed and produced and shared at the society in general. And so democratization is very important, while putting workers and working people at the center of that discussions, and communities as well. So they cannot be sacrificed. They need to be at the heart of this. And from a South perspective, I think it's important to talk about decolonizing and delinking. Delinking from the global capitalist imperialist, not in an autarky way, but building inward-looking economies, prioritizing local needs first, rather than thinking about exporting. So, and in that way, you need to break the cycle of dependencies. And how do you do that? You need to move up the value chain. You need to industrialize. You need to acquire technology. And these are the things that countries and communities and scholars and activists in the global south need to grapple with. These are challenging questions. It's not easy, because it's not easy to say, let's acquire technology and industrialize. The structures, the global structures, will come down on you. There are huge constraints in terms of finances and debts, in terms of free trade agreements. Free trade agreements that are closest in those, let's say the EU with Tunisia and the EU with other countries, that are closest that allow for the corporate sectors to sue governments if they dare to touch their bottom line, their profits. So if the government decides, let's say, I'm not going to exploit this mine, or I'm going to improve the working conditions by raising the minimum wage, or implement some environmental regulations that protect my waters, if that affects the profits of those companies, they go and see, there is a free trade agreement between my country and Tunisia. So they would use it to sue that government in order to, so the government pay. Most of the time, the government pays. So just for you to know. And then I give you another example. Indonesia is an emerging economy. It has huge reserves of nickel. Nickel is one of the critical raw materials that many countries, especially the global north, the EU and the US, try to dominate and monopolize for themselves so they can manufacture electrical vehicles and electrical batteries. Nickel is very important in that. So Indonesia said, okay, I'm going to take an opportunity of that. I'm going to take an opportunity and benefit from that. And I'm not going to export nickel in its raw form. I'm going to process it inside, create more factories, industrialize, create more value inside the country, create more jobs. Of course, that comes with risks of extractivism and pollution and all that stuff, but still, we need to manage those contradictions. You know what the European Union did? And I think you need to look at that to see how the challenges that these countries and communities are facing. This is imperialism. They took them to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to sue them. They told them, how dare you industrialize and process nickel inside your own country? You need to export it in its raw form. So we can benefit from it, and we can do the electrical vehicle value chains in our own countries. You see? These are the dependencies that the imperialist system would like to maintain, and some countries would like to challenge. It's not perfect. It comes with its own problems, but we are moving into a multipolar world. It's not the US hegemony is waning, is going down. It's clear, and of course they are doing everything to maintain, their power. But economically, they are losing the field to China. China dominates a lot of the renewable energy value chains, and you need to know that, in terms of extracting and processing raw materials, in terms of manufacturing photovoltaic panels, in terms of wind turbines. And the US and the EU are really scared. So that's why you see now, look, the contradictions. All over the world, they promote free trade. They come to you, open up your border, let my capital come in, let my corporations benefit from your economy. But then now what they're doing, they are going into protective policies. They are protecting their own economies. They're giving more subsidies to the green industrial chains. They are doing what some people call onshoring. Bring back some of the industries, the green industries, to create American jobs. You see how empire works? They tell you it's about free trade and free investment. Let's open up. Everyone is together. But then when they see it's not benefiting them, they do protective policies. But when others do that, like Indonesia, no. The question on Libya. Libya is, I think, a case in point in terms of the intersections of imperialist domination, imperialist intervention, fossil capitalism, and the climate crisis. It's clear we are seeing those things concentrated in one country. And I just talk a little bit about that storm Daniel, that started in the northern side of the Mediterranean, in Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria, caused some material damage. I think it killed around 20 people, if I'm not mistaken. And then when it moved down, it intensified, and I think it's become a heavy storm, and with heavy downpours just for 24 hours, 2 dams collapsed, partially destroying Derna. Most of the city, I think, is gone, and killing between 11,000 and 20,000 people. These are the estimates right now. I think it's much more going to the 20,000 rather than the 11,000. And these killed in one day. One day. And as you can imagine, some people would say it's about mismanagement, lack of maintenance of those dams, the corruption of the political elites, and maybe people say, it's just a natural disaster. Yeah, it's God's destiny. So these are, for me, simplistic explanations. Of course, there is some truth in all of that, in all of these. I'm not going to deny it. But I think it is more appropriate, if we want to understand what happened there, first of all, is to connect it to the destruction of Libya, the imperialist destruction of Libya, through the intervention in 2011. That led to the destabilization of a whole country, a proxy war that is taking place right now. All the powers are involved, from Italy to France to Russia to Turkey to Emirates to Egypt. Algeria, I think, is involved diplomatically. The corporations are involved, because, corporations do not stop, even in times of war. And we've seen that in the genocide in Gaza. At the time, in the first few weeks of the genocide, Israel gave a dozen of licenses to fossil fuel companies to extract gas in the East Mediterranean. And a similar situation is happening in Libya. So, but then it's not just imperialist destruction that made the country less prepared to tackle that climate crisis. I think that's one of, because there are 2 governments right now, one in the east and one in the west. I haven't visited Libya, so I don't know what's happening, but from what I read, it's really, really bad. But then the climate inequality. Libya, even if it is a big fossil fuel producers, I think I looked at the level of its responsibility. The cumulative responsibility since the 18th century is 0.16%. So it's not that huge. Still, it is a developing country. It's not an industrialized country. But it's facing the climate vulnerabilities. And, in here, that's why I always emphasize the question of climate reparations. But then how do we do them? Is it monetary. For me, it's not just monetary. It's not just about money. For me, it's about seriously equitable cooperations where we share technologies, where we help those countries industrialize. If we don't do that, a lot of people are gonna be sacrificed. Yeah. I think, Gennaro, I need to go because I have actually another conference in an hour.
Okay. Sì, grazie. Many thanks. I think that a radical different migration global policy is part of climate reparation.
Yeah, true.
I think.
Yeah,
And so we have to elaborate this link between climate reparation and climate justice and migration policies. Okay, so Hamza, we stay with you 2 hours. Many thanks for your time and for your not only presentation but to the debate and other information and analysis. And so I send you the link to our record. So I hope we can work together, and if it will be possible, we can organize a meeting in October or November in our university, but not online, in the university. But we
can visit Salerno and
Salerno and Campania and Naples. We have to organize a meeting in our university. Okay, many thanks, Hamza, and grazie a tutte e a tutti. Many thanks to all people connected, joining with us. The next seminar will be on 22 April in Italian morning at 10 a.m. with Ana Lopez Sala from Research Council of Spain in Madrid.
Thank you all.
Tomorrow I'll send you the link for this third seminar. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.